And welcome to day 3 of ReImagine Biopharma. I am your summit host, Frank Dolan. Thank you for coming back for the third day of unbelievable live sessions. We are reimagining the event space for the life sciences industry, whether you're in medtech, biotech, or pharma. Guess what? We're kicking off with these 3 days of live events, but since you're here, we open up the big portal with even more replay content, all of the replays from this week, weekly live events, and more resources than you can imagine. Now, we've got a big day ahead of us. And guess what? It's all about you. While day 1, we talked about reimagining the industry and how we deliver value and innovation to the patient. Day 2, we rethought and reimagined commercialization completely. Because let's face it, the table stakes have changed when it comes to bringing medical innovations through development and into the marketplace. But today, we have to help you. Whether you're leading yourself, you're leading a team, a brand, an organization, there are some unique challenges associated with the times that we're in. And we all want to move towards our goals and not have some of these vehicles of communication and interaction in the way. So before we go through the rest of the schedule and all of that sort of fun stuff, you can take a look at the agenda yourself. But what you have to do is you've got to hear some comments from the day 3 chairperson. The person I'm about to introduce is an incredible professional. He's done amazing things when I talk about marketing strategy, online engagement, but also giving to his community of medtech professionals. I could not be more privileged. I could not be more excited to introduce our chairperson, Omar M. Khateeb. Omar, welcome.
Frank, still the best intros of all time. Thank you. One day, I'm going to have to record you because I want that to be my alarm clock when I wake up every morning. But
there we go.
Such an honor, such a privilege. And, I got to say again, I have to give credit where credit's due. You really leveled up and helped lead our industry and sort of unite biotech, pharma, and medtech through the COVID-19 crisis, through these amazing virtual events. I mean, they've been fantastic. I've been loving them and so happy to be your chairperson for today. It's going to be a lot of fun. I won't let you down.
I know you won't. Someone called me last night that was watching the last couple of days, and she was saying, hey, it's great, and we're enjoying this, and my peers are loving it and such like that. But I got to tell you, every time I turn around, you're introducing someone that's this great professional, but they're like, you're friends with them too. And I'm like, well, let me ask you, were they impressive when they had something to say? Like, oh yeah, oh my God. I'm like, why wouldn't I want to hang out with them? Are you kidding me? So it's great to have you, Omar. You got to lead us today.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's going to be a great day. So to wrap up the week, I think one thing that a lot of people are wondering going into 2021 is what's the professional landscape going to look like? Not only from a venture capital standpoint in terms of funding, but more specifically, the job market. How do you evaluate medtech companies? How do you stand out above the noise? And more importantly, what products are really going to gain traction? And I think for the first session to kick it off, I wanted to introduce a really good friend of mine, somebody who I've gotten known over the years and I have tremendous respect for. You might know him from LinkedIn as Mr. MedTech through his incredibly valuable posts. And that's Giovanni Lauricella. Giovanni is joining us now. Giovanni, you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Omar.
Yeah. Welcome, man. Welcome to day 3. This is the cherry on top. So, and I said it 2 years ago. I said one day we'll be doing this together. We're not on stage right now, but this is the next best thing
coming up.
Absolutely. And let me just give a quick intro to you, Gio. So Giovanni is an executive that works with a variety of medtech startups and also mid-size enterprise companies and provides a variety of guidance, not only in the talent side, but more specifically on the strategic partnerships. And also a big part of the medtech startup world is funding sources. And so you can follow him on LinkedIn. You can also follow his hashtag Mr. MedTech, and you can really get the pulse of what's going on in the medtech industry from a funding standpoint, talent acquisition, and strategic updates. So Gio, thanks for joining us. And I guess my first question to you to kind of kick things off is, with 2020 being the way that it was, right? It accelerated a lot of trends. What do you think are the big things that we're themes that we're coming out of 2021 with from a venture capital and funding standpoint, but how does that translate to the medtech market in terms of professionals looking for the next company to go to? Because we have to be careful in terms of where we go. We want to go to a place where the product is going to get traction, but kind of a big question, but wanted to get your thoughts on that.
There's a lot of, it's a loaded question, complex question, because there's a lot of regulatory and reimbursement variables that are being taken into account. The major topic that, whether you're in the industry or not, you're at least aware of it now: the digital health market, the wearables market, the telemedicine market. Those are technologies that are being rapidly shortened in terms of our standard of care. I mean, the amount of innovation that's taken place this year with those specific categories, I've had numerous calls, video calls, telephone calls, yet to be in person yet, but all these CEOs of these companies are simply having a theme and saying that, we were already on our way there, right? I mean, digital health, wearables, telemedicine, those words were around for years, but the actual usage of them, and whether it's remote patient monitoring or the telemedicine, we were thinking about this being 10 years off, 5 years off. I had a very clear conversation with a CEO last week, actually, who happens to be a CEO of a telemedicine company. And he goes, we were supposed to be here in 10 years from now. And this year has shrunk that decade down to right here, right now. What does that mean? It's complex with the perspective of regulatory. How is the FDA handling this? And then also reimbursement. Who's going to pay for the telemedicine that's being provided right now? Who's going to be paying for the remote access where patients are constantly getting more and more systems to use to monitor themselves? That's a major question. At least from a talent acquisition standpoint this year, I have been tapped on the shoulder with my firm on looking at market access professionals, reimbursement professionals, because they need to start actively engaging those strategies early on, especially in the startups. So coming full circle on this, when you look at the past 8 months of venture capital, with the knee-jerk reaction of follow-on investments from current investment portfolios pre-COVID, there was this notion of VCs holding money to the chest to make sure that their current investment were going to be able to survive, and holding that money as opposed to putting it into new investments with new companies, new startups. They were holding it to see what happened with their current portfolios. That lasted pretty much until the end of May, maybe early June, which was that theme. But then you just saw this massive amount, and it was fairly consistent. When you look at the money, the companies raising money over the past 8 months, it's never stopped in terms of the headlines of this company raised this company raised that. But I have also spoken with numerous CEOs that started their fundraising campaign during COVID and have landed money since. And a lot of that has gone into digital. A lot of that has gone into remote patient monitoring. A lot of that has gone into telemedicine. So from a career standpoint, that's an obvious focus of where this new innovation is happening. And what does that really mean? Software comes into play, regulatory comes into play, reimbursement and market access comes into play. I'll stop there for now.
No, I absolutely agree with you, and there's a lot of deep insights that could be quickly missed in what you just said, but you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that people were not expecting to have successful fundraising during the summer and going into the fall, but they did. And I think one of the things that, at least from my perspective, that I saw was that the companies that were making sure to stay in front of those funding sources and those venture capitalists, those strategic investors, were able to do that. Because again, as the old saying goes, in order to persuade, you have to first get attention. And the best way to get attention these days is, being present online, especially through LinkedIn and social media, because this is where our customers are, this is where our investors are, this is where our competitors are. And I think if you do a good job of capturing that attention, that's where the attention will flow, that's where the money will flow, the best hires, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's no different for a professional. I think both you and I would agree. I mean, we've really grown our professional network just through LinkedIn alone. And I think that a losing strategy, I think, for a company and for a professional, is if you want something, to submit who you are on paper and hope that you're going to stand out from the rest, right? Versus, instead of doing that song and dance on paper, and again, there's always going to be someone who, as a company, on paper, maybe has more commercial traction than you, or as a professional, someone who went to a better college, has a few years more experience. Someone will always beat you out. But if you're able to go to the marketplace directly and you spend your energy and time doing the song and dance there to capture the attention, and more importantly, scale and extend that net of who you're trying to capture, whether it's, again, from a med tech company trying to raise money or a professional trying to get a new job, you will be in a much better position, not only to find that great opportunity, but attract the best ones to you that you weren't even aware of. Would you agree with that? I feel like that's what you do on a daily basis with your brand.
Yeah, I personally have to do that. I would say, if that's not your job, if that's not your day-to-day function, and you're an R&D engineer or a manufacturing expert, I mean, you have to think about this. Companies, we had conferences, right? And depending even on the technical side, sometimes your company would send you those conferences, or you would do continuing education, and there would be these natural human interactive networking events that enabled people to grow their network if they weren't professional online media experts or networkers like you and I are. And so what does the R&D engineer who has a PhD, who spent more than 10, 15 years in school, hoping to make a difference in the medical device industry or the life sciences industry, and then all of a sudden, because they're able to go back into their lab maybe only 2 days a week now because of COVID, and not being able to work with their teams on a habitual basis, or they're in their house and they haven't left in the past 8 months. I mean, if that person isn't embracing online networking, they're going to be staying stagnant. And you have to come up with your own strategy of what is it that you want. And I give this advice to technical engineers, quality, clinical affairs, regulatory experts, whatever it may be, that more on a obligatory measure had to go to these networking conferences for their company on behalf of their company, and those don't exist anymore right now. And it's just not natural in their DNA to put themselves out there and knock on doors and have conversations simply for conversation's sake. And so if you don't embrace that, where are you going to grow your network? How are you going to grow your network? It has to be a more proactive approach. And when COVID goes away, not to say that we're ever going to return to normal, but there will be a time where we can get back out there. Do you really want to have the risk of losing 8 months, a year, 2 years of your potential networking career? So my advice to a lot of technical people has been, know what you want to do, go do some research, come up with the top 50 companies that play either in the direct or adjacent technologies within that space. Come up with an engaging message and send it to the CEOs, or send it to the CTOs, or send it to the executives in that company. And the one thing that I hold, whether it's me within talent acquisition and consulting in med tech, or an actual R&D engineer or a sales professional, whatever it may be, my experience with executives, good executives, especially within the life science and med tech space, is they want to give back. They naturally are mentors, because as they've grown through their careers, they've needed it, and they see the power in having someone help them get to where they are. So I've found out that executives are very giving. Not all of them, but it's also a game of numbers as well, right? So if you come up with your list of 50 companies and you reach out to 3 executives in each company, that's 150 people. If you get 10 or high numbers, 75 responses of, yeah, I'd love to meet you, I'd love to have a phone call, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you do, I'd love to share about a little bit more what we're developing. I mean, that's what you have to do during this time, or you might as well just chalk it up to you being stuck in your castle for the next year and a half.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think that, one of the interesting things when we look at how these mediums help, companies get traction. I mean, we've seen little startups, not just medtech, but consumer brands that sprung up during COVID, and through things like Instagram or LinkedIn became $40-50 million companies. There's a little company that makes a little wheel just for your back They're doing 45 million in revenue this year, right? No partners, no debt, and I think that the interesting thing, if we look at history, 100 years ago with the Industrial Revolution, I mean, the types of leverage you had, and people think of leverage as a bad thing. We can say it's influence. First one was money. If you wanted to do anything, you needed money and capital to do it. Then the second one, which is what Henry Ford got involved with, which is labor, right? You need people to do these things. The third thing just came out in the last 20 years, which is things that are highly, that can be replicated very, very quickly with a very low marginal cost. And an example of that would be code, but the way you and I use it is the media, right? And so rather than having the one-to-one ratio of whether it's you're looking for a job or you're looking for funding resources, again, it's a one-to-one thing. My input is I'm going to submit to this one place, and then hopefully I get something back. The benefit of this new leverage, right, which is utilizing these digital channels, is it's something that can replicate and scale without you don't need capital to do it. You don't need labor, right? You don't have people. And I think that's what's really, really interesting, because then when you use mediums like, let's say, LinkedIn, and I know that we've talked about this, there are things that you and I have either written about or posted about that were done a few years ago that are still being discovered, right? Even my current role today, right? I got this fantastic role at Potrero Medical, and it's a little bit of a dream job, in my opinion. Happened because the CEO was reading one of my articles a few years ago, right? So you never know. And I think that's the new leverage, that's the new influence today, which is how do you use these digital channels and mediums, right, to replicate and scale this kind of leverage that you wouldn't normally have, And I think that's something you can see as both a medtech professional, a venture capitalist, or anything else. But the question is, it's the free money on the table, and how many people are going to go pick it up, right? And right now, it's not a whole lot, because it's a tiny, tiny fraction of our industry who's really leveraging that.
Agreed. My question, I did have a question for you, though, because given the fact that you're the marketing expert, both as a medical device marketing expert and an online marketing expert as well, the one thing that I think is interesting is that we've had a fairly conservative industry, medtech. It's regulated, FDA, or obviously by regulatory bodies around the world. When you watch the pharmaceutical television commercials of someone riding a bike with puppies, et cetera, there's been this pharmaceutical or biotech direct-to-consumer marketing for years. But realistically, you don't see that either at all or not that much with medical devices. And now that it isn't this in-person conference training session approach of being able to take a device and making sure that there's a plethora of physicians that are aware of it for utilization, et cetera, how are medtechs adapting to the marketing aspect of being able to get their products out to a wider audience without being in person, being able to train or give live demonstrations? How is the medtech world adapting to COVID now from a regulated marketing perspective?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'm very proud to say, Potrero has done a really great job. We have great leadership and a CEO that was really open-minded and pays attention to what's happening in the market. If you're not following him, Joe Urban, you should follow Joe Urban on LinkedIn and see what I'm talking about. But I think that, again, what I've been speaking about this topic for many years now, about medical device companies being online, right? Not just LinkedIn, but Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, because that's where our customers are. That's where they're having conversations. If you don't believe me, go on LinkedIn and search #MedTwitter. There are physicians having real-time conversations on a daily basis. Many of these departments and hospitals, they have a social media, a resident or fellow who runs the social media, right? And they have intern programs and journal clubs and everything. And so the key is that, again, this goes back to things that are that can be replicated with a very marginal cost. Hiring a huge sales team and expecting them to go and spend a lot of money on hotels and flights and everything, going and knocking on doors to try and get in and showing up unannounced without permission is the old model. It does not work anymore, and nobody's interested in that, because as consumers, right, doctors, nurses, hospital admins, they don't put their white coats on and suits and go into work as one type of person and leave being another. It's the same person. So we've all been conditioned to this way of getting nurtured through a digital channel in the buyer's journey. And medtech companies have to do the exact same thing. I think that starts by having a presence online, right? And that's not just, we're going to start a LinkedIn page and a Facebook page and we'll schedule posts for 3 months and just let them run on automatic. The market is a living thing that changes and grows every day. You have to engage with it. So again, shameful plug here. Follow Potrero Medical, follow me, follow Joe Urban. You'll see what I'm talking about, because aside from our company posting and sharing information, and value with the medical community, our employees, our leaders get engaged with the market. Meaning when doctors, if there's a doctor that we like or we're trying to get engaged with, when they post, we go to engage with the content. We reshare it, right? We started a podcast that's non-branded where all we do is bring on healthcare leaders to help amplify their message. And so the biggest thing I think is that, again, if you think about, simply put, selling, right? Selling and marketing. At the end of the day, it's getting attention, persuading and influencing in one direction, and then closing a deal. That's as simply put as it is. And a big part of that is trust. And so using digital channels like social media, where customers are already there, they're having those conversations, they're paying attention. How do you show up? How do you build a brand that people start to see on a daily basis, where they see your people, your leadership, your trials and tribulations, your success, your traction, so they can start to trust you. They start to know who you are. And then through that, right, they want to do business with you. They want to try your products. Because if you can't get attention, right, and from that attention develop some trust, you're not going to be able to influence or persuade in any direction. And this is nothing that's new. There's a reason why Apple is it's $1 trillion company. Apple still puts a lot of money in marketing. They still put up not only billboards in traditional marketing, but they have online presence. They have influencers. They have all these things. There's a reason for that, right? And I think that medtech companies really need to pay attention to this.
So and thank you for that. I think to also give a full 360 foundation to that, then going back to the whole pharmaceutical commercial on the television that we're all used to, why did it take COVID to change the marketing practices of the medtech industry?
Yeah, I'll tell you, the reason why is that if again, for those who follow I have a weekly book review that I do. It's #MindLoom. Most of those books are psychology, and the one thing you learn from behavior change is that people do not change the behavior, not necessarily because they don't want to, because they don't stand to lose anything. That's what causes people to buy into something, is when there's a pain, right? There's a chance to lose something. And so if there's no pain, there's no fear of the future, no one's going to change. And so when COVID hits and all the hospitals shut down and they say no reps, nobody's coming in here. And oh, by the way, conferences are gone, where all our customers go once a year and they're all in one place at one time. Now the medtech industry says, well, all our options are gone now. This is the only one we got. And again, and I'm a harsh critic of our industry. I'm very proud of it. This is one of the greatest industries to work in, because what we do genuinely helps save people lives, right? But again, the medtech industry, when they change practices, they look at the new thing and they don't try and adopt it as a new form. They say, how do we take the old thing we're doing and just do it in this new way? For example, I can tell you that a lot of nurses, doctors, and hospital admins who I've talked to are exhausted from email, because guess what? MedTech companies or reps buy out lists, or they go online and find their email and they just blast away. They're showing up unannounced. And what's interesting is that if you talk to anybody from the MedTech industry and you say, what do you think about, I don't know, when someone you connect with on LinkedIn, or just out of the blue, you get a email about some sales software or marketing software thing. What do you say? And I always see, first there's a lot of, foul language, and people are like, I say, like, who the heck is this? How did they get my email? Spam. And here's the thing, what MedTech companies don't realize, when you do this, just a few times, when your reps decide, hey, we're going to blast this hospital, everybody there to try and get in, at some point, the hospital IT, because these hospitals aren't standalone, they're owned by corporations, they'll say, well, we're getting a lot of emails from this one domain. We're going to block it. And now you get dinged by Google. You cannot email anybody at that hospital anymore. And in a way, you've just created your brand. You've hung your brand next to an emotion of being really annoying, right? And so again, like MedTech industry, it's going to learn. You know, I was harping about this a few years ago. They're trying to change now. I'm going to harp about this now, which is they're going to learn the hard way. They're going to learn the painful way, but they will learn. And it's going to be accelerated, not only because of COVID, but because if as you've pointed out, Gio, in your post, there's a shift because now a lot of tech has exhausted the consumer space, all these areas. And now they're looking at these ripe areas for disruption, which is old conservative industries like healthcare or finance, right? And so once that starts to happen, not only will that force the incumbents to change, but that's also going to bring new money in. And that new venture capital and strategic investors are coming in. They know how to evaluate, and they're going to say, "Hey, what's your marketing funnel look like? What's your online presence look like? What's your brand stand for? All these things." And MedTech needs to get, we need to get our act together. MedTech, pharma, biotech, because that day is here now, right? We can't run away from it.
Well said.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I wanted to jump on in terms about learning right now, I couldn't agree with you more, especially on a couple different fronts. So two, on the money and the people side, as you had mentioned, and I'll go high level real quick and then we can go deep however you'd like. But regarding the money, I've been following it tremendously close, specifically from the COVID timeline. And we have had more new investors look at what we'll call medtech / health tech come from outside industries over the past 8 months, who typically would not have looked at healthcare, looked at medtech, and are now joining. Is it a fad? Is it a join the bandwagon type thing? Probably, but we have had more new investors come on in the past 8 months, historically and statistically, than we have in the past 3 years within medtech, specifically going after digital health, the wearables market. And it's also coming from obviously big corporate players that are starting to merge, like the Apples, like the Googles, who have been in it for a little while. But we're starting to see brand new players in the investment side and alternative investments for medtech and healthcare, which is just absolutely expanding the opportunities for small startups to actually pursue money.
Why do you think that is, Gio? I mean, first, where are they coming from, and why now? What do you think was the catalyst or the trigger to get them to start looking into the industry and coming in?
So a couple things, right? So when we look at digital health and we look at more of the software platforms, typically there's a lower bar on the regulatory side, and historically, the medical device or even life sciences in general is pegged or blemished with being long timelines, high regulatory burdens, et cetera. When you start looking at companies that are doing telemedicine, they're typically not even regulated. And actually, even though they fall within the healthcare world, they're not regulated as a medical device, for example. They're actually a telecommunications company. If you want to look at something quite interesting, not too long ago, within the past month, there's a company called Avail Medical Systems or Med Systems that just announced raising $100 million. They are a telecommunications company that services media for live procedures, for training, and for obviously sharing data for physicians to learn, whether it's live training or just simply video capture to be able to explain surgeries, et cetera. It's not a medical device. It's not a medical software. It's a telecommunications company, but yet it services the medical device industry. And so when you have a lot of these newer technologies, telemedicine, remote patient monitoring, having a lower either regulatory bar or not regulated at all, but now they are falling underneath this healthcare umbrella, you're starting to have these brand new investors say, interesting, shorter timelines, not regulatory burdened as the other ones were. And also obviously a massive need, and they're blowing up right now. Let's get in. And so that's why we're seeing a massive turn into the investment world on that side.
Fascinating. Yeah, I had no idea. And I mean, again, it's one of those things where, I hate to say it, we're going to see it in our industry. for digital photography, Instagram should not have come up with that. That technically should have been Kodak. For the like small condo and apartment rentals, that technically shouldn't have been Airbnb. It should have been Marriott or Hilton. I think we're going to see the exact same thing in medtech. Now, Gio, there's something I'm going to do a little bit of a shift, because I know that a lot of people who are watching are really wanted to hear this from you and I. But let's talk a little bit about 2021, because a lot of people are looking to land a new career, land a new job, get into medtech, or just move around. And I really want us to kind of share some of our pearls of wisdom in terms of, standing out from the noise, things to think about in an interview. And, one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you on, aside from you having a finger on the pulse on the funding side, but I've always trusted you when it came to career advice. And a lot of all the professionals who reach out to me, a lot of things I'm telling them, essentially me parroting what you had told me. So going into 2021, like, what would be some key things you would give to people in terms of how do you stand out above the noise? And maybe you can talk a little bit about how you've created your professional brand on LinkedIn.
Yeah. So how do you stand above the noise? To answer that very succinctly, define yourself. Focus on something tight. Don't try to go so wide. It's nice for the individual to say, I would love a broader experience. I would love to go wide and learn a lot about, or I should say a little about a lot of different things. But then when it comes to you being out in the market, who's going to be drawn to you when you're a master of none, right? And so when you can't provide that value back, then it's great that you know a little bit about a lot, but that's not a brand. You just become another number at that point. So, what we're going to see a lot of, and I already have with a lot of clients asking for, as we build their teams and have been building their teams throughout this year, there are hyper specific positions that are being requested now. The generalists, I haven't had that many of them this year. It's really been hyper specific, because think about this. We're not in the same room anymore. It's a lot of hiring over Zoom, hiring over video calls. If you aren't the master of that craft, then these companies can't afford to have you learn on their dime. And especially given the fact that there's not that massive environment that we're all used to of being able to be trained together and learn the corporate culture or learn the company culture or learn the technology and play around with it and be brought up to speed. There's none of that. I mean, when you get hired over Zoom, and if it's a company who's based in Seattle and you happen to be out of Atlanta, and you won't even be ever in the same room as that company for the next 8 months or so, how are you going to deliver if you aren't the expert of what they're looking for? You got to hit the ground running. And I'm hearing a lot of that demand from clients who are using our firm to be able to build their teams and saying, I need experts, because given the circumstances right now, we don't have time for the ambiguity or even the upside on the training of this individual. So how do you stand out? Don't be afraid to focus. Don't be afraid to go so deep on something thinking that you're not going to get noticed because you aren't wide enough, or you're not hitting another area where you possibly could get tapped on the shoulder. Be an expert in your field, master that, and then brand yourself as that. I make it very clear. My team within the firm I make it incredibly clear to the medtech industry. Don't hire me for automotive team building. Don't hire me for pure pharmaceutical or pure biotech. You want to do combination product and you want to bring these industries together? Absolutely. But you're going to find out what the medtech industry is doing. You're going to understand what the trends are, where the geographies are hot, where there's non-competes, what the compensation structures are and why, because that's my focus. And so when it comes to dealing with clients, dealing with companies that are actively growing, they know that if they come to me, they know what they're getting. They also know what they're not getting. And I spend more time upfront telling what I'm not than what I am. And then when I tell them what I am, it's very easy. And it doesn't have to be a consultant like myself or our firm. It's the same thing for an engineer. It's the same thing for clinical affairs. It's the same thing for regulatory, right? If you're a PMA expert in regulatory, stay there. It might be nice to say, yes, I also have 510K experience, fine. But that can wait right now. There's a demand for PMA. Own that. Put yourself out there. If you're a clinical affairs expert and you're really habitual at doing first-in-man studies, but all of a sudden you're getting tapped on the shoulder by Medtronic to run a post-market study, and you really have never done that before, stay in your lane for right now, because there are so many companies that are asking for these hyper-specific roles, and then they'll actually pay for that as well. Not to say that there's some massive premium going on, but what it is you shine the light on yourself to make your process much easier. And so what I would say, just to make it very simple, is focus and go as deep as you possibly can, and don't be distracted or worried about the fact that you're not going wide enough, simply so you can get noticed in some capacity. Because even if you do, then when you're not the expert, you're going to get passed on anyway.
I think that's such good advice, and I think there's a lot. I mean, it's very simple but powerful advice. And look, there's this old saying, and I think it's what you just said is not only applicable for individuals but also for companies, right? There's a temptation to show that you can do a lot and be applied in a lot of different places, but as the saying goes, either you're meaningful specific or you're a wandering generality. And unfortunately, I mean, outside our industry, I see a lot of great professionals on LinkedIn who put out a lot of content, they do a lot of things, so of course they get a lot of attention, which is fantastic. I don't know what they stand for. I don't know what I'm buying, right? And that's a problem, right? And I think this tendency is that people get afraid, especially new professionals, that I don't want to get like pigeonholed somewhere. But the thing is, you're not a tree. Just because you lay your roots somewhere, you can get up and move and change. For me, when a few years ago, 5 years ago, when I didn't have any kind of brand, no one knew who I was, I chose that, hey, I have to go deep in something. And if I show deep knowledge in something, and again, this is something the brain does. When we see super successful people like LeBron James, you think that he is, but you think that because they're successful in one domain, they must be successful and really great in everything else. And so I think that there's benefit to that. So for me, 5 years ago, I started writing an article a week. And again, like I mentioned, CEO of my current company was reading those when he was the director, and those technically were what brought me out to SF. Is I focused on what I stood for, which is I was a marketing guy, and I was in surgical robotics. I went very, very deep on that. And in the last 5 years, I've really expanded out a lot. I speak at biotech and pharma conferences. I've worked outside of robotics. Now I'm at a predictive health company. I've done some consumer stuff, right? But at the end of the day, I went very, very deep on first of its kind technology to the market, which is robotics and marketing, right? And because I really established myself in that one area, people at least could assign some kind of definition or meaning to who Omar Khateeb is, right? But if you don't have that, right, and once you have that established, you can expand out to other things, obviously. But if you don't stand for something specific from the beginning, people get to assign whatever they want to you, right? And at that point, again, if you're not a meaningful specific, you're a wandering generality, and you just kind of get lost in the rest of the noise. And I see that happen so often, not only with professionals and companies. I think, that advice you said to you is just, it's so true. So let's say for a professional who does identify that, like let's just say that they are really passionate about like business development or regulatory. You do a great job of providing value and sharing articles and posts on a weekly basis. Let's say I'm an individual who's really passionate about, let's say quality and regulatory. What would you say that I do, on a weekly basis to start developing that brand and then really standing out as a hire?
Great question. So especially virtually speaking now, and how to get yourself out there, build that network, it's giving, right? So put something above yourself and then allow that to come back. So what I would say is regulatory or business development professionals, or let's just say a sales professional, right? So there was an article that actually I sent you earlier this morning that talks about the state of sales reps and how COVID has affected that in the OR room sales rep mentality that used to be forever, and now really what's allowed versus what exists now and what's going to look like moving forward. Going back, it's the classic filter model, right? And the process. So let's just stick with regulatory. What I would do is make sure first and foremost your LinkedIn is tight, clean, informative, not fluffy, or certainly even not filled out, or not even filled in, rather, with the good detail. I mean, if you have experiences, put them on there. The LinkedIn algorithm picks up these keywords and allows you to become in searches and put yourself in the eyes of the right people who might be searching for you. That's first and foremost. So make sure that your LinkedIn profile is robust. But when you're out there, whatever you do first in terms of branding yourself, make sure you can commit to it. That's rule number one. And it doesn't matter if it's one article a month or one article a week or one article a day. I mean, just a little bit behind the scenes, I have a calendar reminder that pops up on my calendar every single day at 9 a.m. Eastern time, my time. At this point, it's ingrained in my DNA that I do it, hours beforehand. But it just simply says, put something on LinkedIn. So I have committed. And even when I'm on holiday or traveling or wherever, I still make time. I make one posting a day at a minimum. But whatever you do, you have to be able to commit to that, because that becomes your brand. And so when people see what I put out every single day, it's about medtech, or it's about funding within medtech, or it's about startups within medtech, or it's about the innovation within medtech, once again. So once again, going back to that regulatory expert, find the nuances of regulatory or regulations that are changing, whether it's what's happening with European medical device regulations and how it was postponed last May 26, 2020, and now it's going to be implemented in May 26, 2021, this coming year. Take that, put that out, and then come up with, once again, if you're actively looking, or if you simply want to expand your network, and maybe you are a regulatory affairs expert that has expertise in software, which is actually a very highly regarded and highly sought after skill set, because there's so many software, health tech and med tech companies out there right now, that regulatory experts with having a software expertise that can influence the FDA or work with a notified body, that is so highly sought after by so many developing and early stage companies at this point, that if you were to put together a hot list, once again, going back to that special 50 number, put together a list of 50 digital health startup companies that you may be interested in. Connect with the CEO. And then when you have an interesting article that says, this is what the FDA is doing with digital health. And actually, less than a month ago, they just came out with a release that the FDA opened up a digital health center within the FDA in order to accommodate the ever-changing regulations and also all the digital health plays that are happening right now, all the startups that are occurring, all the technology that's being innovated. So come up with a list of 50 companies, connect with the C-level or the VPs, and then take that little link to the interesting article that you found and personalize it. Hello, Tom. Hello, Bjorn, whatever it may be. Found this interesting article on the ever-changing regulations in digital health and where we see the market going from a regulatory perspective. I would love to share, or I thought I would share that with you. Hope we can stay connected. Let me know if you're ever interested in a phone call. Best your name. I mean, something as simple as that. And then you put yourself out there and you're branding yourself, but also first and foremost, giving value to someone who really otherwise wouldn't be reaching out to you.
Yeah, I can't agree more with you. I mean, and I think that's the thing that people forget is, goodwill really does go a long way, and I've learned that. I learned that, working with you and the people at the Mullings Group, and I've just realized that, there's something about the universe that makes it work that way. And, a lot of people who don't know how to get started, sometimes are a little bit shy about posting and everything. I tell them, I said, look, you have a superpower that you don't even know about. Like, you can't teach a good attitude. You can't train for that. So how do you demonstrate that before you get to an interview? Heck, go follow the company you want to work for, follow their leadership, and every time they post, like, leave a thoughtful, positive comment. Like, for me, I love celebrating medtech. I love amplifying and boosting people up. And so every day, whenever I see somebody releasing a new product, or the team posts something, or they have something great, a lot of times my network has grown just because I go into the comments. I'm like, hey, at whoever the person who posted it, and then I tag the company and I say, this company's marketing, whatever. Congrats! What a great campaign! Congrats on getting this FDA approval. Congrats on this. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I've done that even with competitors, because at the end of the day, a rising tide raises all boats. And I think just from that, you can get your, I told this to somebody a few days ago. I said, let's just say you for whatever reason, you don't want to post anything for a whole year. if every day you made a point and you set the intention and you have discipline to go and leave a thoughtful comment on some posts, and then some, some posts, maybe you leave a more deeper comment where it's, let's say it's a topic you know about, you can brand yourself just by doing that as being someone who has a super positive and supportive attitude, and you have some domain expertise in something, whether it's sales or marketing or regulatory or even in product design or engineering, right? And I think that the thought is starting with adding, and again, it's kind of like in social media, it's like a horse that's been beaten to death, adding value. And I think the simple way to do that is to think about how can I create something this week that would be really helpful to other people, that one person would want. And I think that's the key. And a lot of times, Joe Urban, again, he was writing these emails to our sales team every day just to kind of like, start the day off and everything. And I told him, I said, you should really be publishing these things on LinkedIn. So now he's been publishing this awesome series. Again, you should follow it. And what he does, which is the way every great writer writes a book, is he writes these with one person in mind, right? So I think too many times, people, they want to get this massive reach and they want something that goes viral. That's not the point. When I post things online, when I make a video, I have one, maybe two people in mind that I know that it would really help them. It would be appreciative of them. A lot of times I do things that, I'll write an article or do a video for the younger version of myself, something that I wish I knew about back then. And I think when you do that, the rest takes care of itself. But you said something very important, Gio, which is with your 9 a.m. reminder, right? The key is setting the discipline. Even I remember you remember Men's Warehouse? Remember, like, you're gonna like the way you look?
Yeah.
I met that founder many years ago in Oakland, and with his like deep, like raspy bourbon voice, he's like, marketing isn't about being super creative or everything. It just has to do with persistence and consistency. And I agree with that. And that takes discipline. Because again, even if you have this amazing network, you're lucky if maybe 5 or 10% of the people in your network sees what you post. So you have to constantly be showing up to the market. Because after you do that for a few weeks, a few months, and then even years, I know you and I, we've been doing some of these routines for years now. Because at that point, if Giovanni Lauricella stopped posting for 3 days, I guarantee you there's a good amount of people out there who would miss it and say, wait, where's Gio's post? Where's that article? Because that's what I need right now. That's what I constantly look for, right? And I think that's the key. And to get to that point where you have a brand and it means something, right? It takes discipline and consistency. You don't have to be super creative. I tell people, you can share an article, one article a week, and just summarize it and maybe put your own 2 cents. You're showing a way of providing value, right? And being a distribution network. And I think that's what it's all about. We're getting close to time now. One other thing I wanted to touch on, because again, selfishly, when I get these questions from younger professionals and everything, a lot of the advice I give is parroting advice that I've heard you say, and you're one of the best at this. But I think when people interview at companies, right, and they evaluate new roles, they end up at companies because the pay is higher and that it's maybe a big box brand that they feel good about, but they don't dig deep in the interview and realize that they're also interviewing the company. What are some questions that many candidates you feel don't have the courage to ask, and you feel like you should really drive home and ask these type of questions? Is there anything like that?
Typically speaking, and also it's all about motivation too, right? So if you are recruited and if you're in a position that you're gainfully employed, incredibly happy with, but someone just happened to tap you on the shoulder and show you something interesting, you have to get into the psychology of that person. Likely not going to move. We'll entertain it simply because they're probably curious enough to say, hey, I might not know something about this and who knows where this is going to lead, but let me just learn a little bit more. It's like negotiations, right? Whenever you're negotiating from top of the hill versus bottom of the hill, it's two different mentalities. And so let's go with the first one. If you're negotiating from the top of the hill, if you don't need the job, if you don't need the position, if you don't need to make a move, if you don't feel threatened of where you currently are, and you have all that quote unquote leverage to be saying, okay, I could do great in this position. It's a great technology, but at the end of the day, I simply don't need it. That enables someone to say, okay, let me give them reasons. This sounds intense. Let me give them reasons to almost not hire me. Let me ask questions that I normally wouldn't ask if I was negotiating from the bottom of the hill. How much runway do you have left? What's your burn rate every month? How much money do we have left in the bank? And if you hire me next month, am I going to be out of a job in 6 months because we don't have enough money? Sometimes people don't ask those really tough questions because they're negotiating from a bottom of the hill. And that means when you're looking up, you're scared because maybe you're unemployed and you simply need a job, or you are absolutely miserable where you are right now. And fortunately, you've been tapped on the shoulder to possibly have a way out. And so you don't want to mess up the opportunity. So you end up not asking sufficient questions and only projecting on how you would be great for the opportunity so that you can actually join the organization, which realistically, it ended up being a one-way street because you didn't ask enough questions on yourself to understand really what you were getting involved in. And you basically were just in sell mode with sweaty palms on hopefully that you don't lose the opportunity so that you ultimately get into the company. If you're negotiating from the top of the hill, which here's the rub, and this is the advice, which is very tough advice, I would say try to adopt the from the top of the hill negotiation tactic, no matter if you're unemployed, no matter if you need to get out, or no matter if you're happily employed, because you need to ask the tough questions. It needs to be a two-way street. If a company who has an opportunity isn't selling why their technology is the best, why their culture is the most amazing, why they see you on their team as being a great fit, in addition to saying, okay, here are my questions, Mr. Company, and this is why I would be great. If it's not a two-way sell street, there's a problem. And if you're negotiating from the bottom of the hill and not asking enough questions, you're going to end up putting yourself in a position that you have no clue what you're getting involved in, which could lead to catastrophe.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think, to kind of wrap things up, I think the big theme between what you just shared right now, what we talked about with the medtech investment community and medtech companies during COVID is have courage, right? There's benefit in having some vulnerability and really putting yourself out there, because if you do that, not everybody will. And that's a great way to stand out, get attention, build trust, and get the things that you want. So Gio, I feel like we can go for another 3 hours. Unfortunately, we're going to be wrapping things up. We should definitely do another one of these and have like a longer, deeper one, but greatly appreciate you coming on. I want to encourage everybody, aside from connecting with Gio, go follow the hashtag Mr. MedTech, MisterMedTech. That's the hashtag that provides all this amazing content through. It's pretty much like my morning digest. When I wake up and I see what's going on, you'll thank me later for following it. And Gio, thanks again for spending some time with us. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Definitely. I guess now that we got to wait for Frank, because I have no control of these things. There he is. Welcome back, man. Welcome back to the party. Oh, Frank, you're muted.
Yep.
I have a voice here too.
Giovanni. It wouldn't be a virtual conference without having a little, technical difficulties here and there. It's kind of like par for the course.
I know. I know. We're not even going to talk about dress codes during these virtual summits. That's for sure.
Business from the waist up.
There you go.
From the waist down.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Within the camera, this is what we can confirm. That's it. Everything else, all bets are off. But hey, Gio, Omar, thank you so much. On behalf of the entire audience, we really appreciate you spending that time. We can't wait for that follow-up session because while you guys could go for a few more hours, I think we could go for 10 more hours because we're all getting lots of pearls from what you folks have shared. So I really want to thank you both.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining on this session. We've got more sessions to come. Take a look at the agenda and enjoy the rest of ReImagine Biopharma. We'll see you soon.